So we could start moving to your seats if you want. We're going to go ahead and get started on the Sustainment Panel. I just named that. We'll just wait a couple seconds, folks, if you want to take a seat. If not, just idle curiosity. How you doing? Okay. Well, listen, I guess we got about 30 to 40 minutes, and my name's Major General Doug Gabram. I'm the Aviation and Missile Commanding General at Redstone Arsenal. And what we want to do is just talk to you a little bit, primarily, and then let you ask some questions on sustainment, on anything that's going on at Huntsville or around the branch that has to do with sustainment material readiness. First thing I'd like to do is I want to introduce an all-star cast of colonels that work for me. But before I do that, I want to also introduce the Acting Director of AMRDEC, Mr. Jeff Lang, out here in the front row, and Dr. Bill Lewis. Because they're real hard questions, we're going to defer to them. So with me up here from your left is Colonel Dave Almquist, the AMCOM G5, Colonel Al Lancetta, the CCAD commander. Colonel Andy Gillette is the military deputy for the Aviation Logistics Center, ALC, within AMCOM. And then Colonel Mike Best, the ACLC commander at Fort Rucker, Alabama. So that's the team we have aligned for you today. So what I thought I'd do is just intro it a little bit, give you a brief mission statement that us at AMCOM have, and that is essentially we develop and deliver aviation material readiness for Army requirements, said very, very simply. There's as many of you know, General Gus Perna, AMC commander, took over about 4 months now. And so we have a new campaign plan and a strategy moving forward, which causes us to enable a new campaign plan. And our 4 lines of effort is, number 1, material and sustainment readiness. Number 2, future Army. Number 3, the human dimension. And number 4, resource management. And if you know, hopefully you know anything about the CSA's priorities, it's aligned 1, 2, 3. And of course, money is very important, so we added a 4th called resource management. So those are the 4 lines of effort in our campaign plan as we move forward. And everything leads into outputs for the United States Army. Not PO Aviation, not Army, but the Army. And another point I want to add, and this is old news to some, but maybe not for others, and that is, you guys smile. All right. There you go. Is the AMC Mission Command Realignment Order that was enabled about a year ago now. So we've got about a year under our belt. And what that does is that OPCON's Operational Control, the AMRDEC, Aviation Missile Research Development Engineering Center, and ACCR, Army Contracting Command Redstone, under AMCOM. So yes, maybe hope some of your ears are burning out there. So the contracting, all the issues that you have and you want to talk to me about, you can talk to me and not Ms. Wyrick. You can talk to Ms. Wyrick too, but I can help. So ACCR and AMRDEC, now OPCON to AMCOM. So with that, I can see I don't see a lot of smiles out there. I know it's after lunch. I'll open it up for questions. Anything you want to fire at us. If not, then we'll talk a little bit more about some other interesting things. So please, fire away if you have it. Yes, ma'am. Here, I'll come to you. I got to get my steps in.
Me too, sir. My question, I'm Megan Doherty-Myers from Avison. My question pertains to the use or future use of additive manufacturing technologies as it pertains to sustainment as a ways of mitigating or even eliminating logistics supply lines.
Okay. All right. Andy will give you a shot, or I'm going to hand the mic to Jeff Langout. Who wants it? Jeff? All right.
So the short answer is there's 2 answers, right? So for aviation components, stuff that goes around really fast and we are a long ways away from being able to use additively manufactured parts. Think about the way when you actually construct a part additively manufactured, right? You spray it, right? We're sure we can get the right dimensions. We're sure we can do all of the right things we need to do, from physically making the part look the same. But we absolutely understand casting and forgings and how metals respond and all that kind of stuff. So you start spraying stuff with a machine to build up a part. Are we sure that it's going to have the same fatigue strength? So I think about it, when you get a paper clip, how many times does it take you to bend your paper clip before it breaks in half? Well, on aviation components, we have to know that exactly, because you don't want stuff like that happen in flight. So from an additive manufactured standpoint, we're working very hard to figure out what's the right way to qualify. That's a term we use to qualify those types of techniques. So we have working groups going on across all of the laboratories within RDECOM. The Navy is doing some aggressive things, so we can actually understand how those things respond from a fatigue life and a dynamic strength perspective. Not trying to get too techno. Anyway, for the stuff that is, you hear about NASA has got additively manufactured parts on the space station today. Yep, it might be a shelf. Shelf is a great thing, and there's a lot of things that we can do, but when it comes to the critical components, which end up being the most expensive ones, a lot of work going on, but not there yet. Dr. Lewis, from a long-term perspective, do you have anything to add to that?
We currently are writing a spec for additive in conjunction with OSD. Additive parts are on all these FVL vehicles you see around here. We have additive parts on every one of these vehicles, but they're vents, they're clips, things like that. The Navy, in conjunction with us as a part of APCOI, has put a critical flight part on the V-22, and we've flown that for about 50 hours. Right now, we have a redundant path and all those things to make sure that, that the processes are verified, etc. But we're going to start using additive. Where we're going to use additive first is at low load path elements, cases, things of that nature. Then we'll progress into secondary items, and finally, we're going to probably be a follower for a lot of the critical safety items. But we've already started the spec writing process, and we are accepting additive as a process, but we have to learn a lot more before it's a complete process. I'll put it that way.
Thanks. Thanks, Bill. Hey, let me just, before we take the next question, I want to take this time to talk a little bit about Corpus Christi Army Depot. Who's been to CCAD? Okay, so raise your hands again. You see, you got a big smile on your face. You enjoy it there? Do you work for him? Okay, that figures. About 40%. So one of the missions that we've charged Colonel Lancetta with is to reduce our repair cycle time on UH-60s, because frankly it's just taken us a little bit too long to finish a UH-60, and we've been doing this for 25, 30 years. A lot of factors involved, I got it. But we've come up with a new a program called Art of the. It used to be Possible. The Air Force named it Possible, but since we're Army, we're going to go Probable. So it's called the Art of the Probable. It's based on a theory of constraints, essentially a gated strategy where you have business rules associated with each one of them. We're pretty excited about that. Involved with this, however, is a change in culture with our workforce. And the OIB, CCAD, is extremely important. And as General Vai used to say, it's our national security insurance policy. You don't want to use it unless you have to. And the Vice would say, when he visited our other depot in Letterkenny up in Pennsylvania, he asked the depot commander one question, and that is, can you surge? So if and when we go to war, we got to be able to surge. So the Art of the Probable, we're very excited about that, and I want to turn it over for a couple minutes to Colonel Al Lancetta to talk about that.
So just very quickly, like the boss said, we wanted to make sure that we were getting aircraft back out to the warfighter quicker. And the way we were doing it in the past, if you look at our supply system, we had some contracts in place that offered us some responsive ways of getting material flow back to the warfighter. Well, sequestration came on board, and that kind of went away. So the contracts were still in place, but the money started dwindling away. So we developed this system called AOP for short, and it's based on theory of constraints. So if you know anything about theory of constraints, all that is every process that you have has a constraint, or what we call a bottleneck. So if you identify that bottleneck, you can attack it several ways. 1, with money, 2, with labor, and 3, with process. Well, we knew the money went away, the labor was kind of stagnant, we kind of went down on labor force, so we had to make sure our process was better, and we were using systems in place that we had in the digital world. In the past, we were using some old legacy antiquated systems, manually systems that didn't cause some demand signals in our Army supply system. So we have this thing called LMP. It brings us, it's an ERP that AMC has produced, multi-billion-dollar AMC product that we weren't using because of legacy systems. So now, what that caused us to do was not have a demand and supply system. So with this gated process, we identified our bottleneck as what we call gate 4 structures. But let me go back. So in this theory of constraints, our bottleneck was that structures phase. For us to be able to get in front of that, we had to order parts or do this LMP, what we call left of induction planning. So I wanted my folks to look 120 days out before an aircraft was even inducted. We call that gate 0. What that allows us to do is forecast out planning-wise what we'll need so those parts meet the aircraft at gate 4, which is our bottleneck gate, our structures gate. So that's the material flows as needed. Within each of the gates, we have rules of flow that I can't break, and that allows us to meet the demand well within what the warfighter needs. So this process, this AOP process, allows us to get them back out to the warfighter much faster, much more efficient, and really streamlines our overall process. I focused that AOP on the UH-60 recap because right now it was the most visible system, most visible program, and that was the ones that the warfighter really need. Eventually, what we want to use is, what we want to do is push that system down to our component side, our rotor blades, everything else we have at CCAD. If you know anything about CCAD, it's a pretty large organization. So I wanted to focus on one area at a time, and then we'll get better and better. What that sets us up for is UH-60 Victor. And if you know anything about what the Army Aviation Modernization Program is, we're going to get to Victor eventually. So we owe the Army 760 UH-60 Victors before it's said and done. I think they may have talked about it earlier, the earlier panel. FY19, I owe 10 Victors, and we want to set ourselves up so that we create efficiencies across the board, so when we have to do 48, 48, 48 in upcoming years, we can do that much faster, much more streamlined, and the process is already mature. Right now, we've only been at it about 8 months, but that process has gained some momentum and maturity every single month since we've been doing it. So we've had pure AOP aircraft in our system. There's 5 of them right now. Another thing I had to deal with was the legacy aircraft were not privileged with the left of induction planning that I talked about earlier. We had to deal with that the way we normally dealt with that, through old legacy systems and the planning we had already in place. But we have about 5 aircraft in pure AOP, and right now each gate is getting better and better and better. So we know that eventually we will get those aircraft out in our target date of 275 days. Now that's not an easy thing to do right off the bat. It's like turning a battleship. So it's incremental changes, incremental improvements, but our guidance and our intent is each aircraft will take 275 days to get it back out to the warfighter. That is much better than what we've been doing, in excess of 575 days in some cases. So we are very excited about this process. Everyone's on board, to include higher headquarters. All my partners have already come on board with that as well. So we think that's the way ahead, and that's the way forward in preparation for UH-60 Victor. So subject to your questions. Sir?
Any questions on that at all? Also, what Al didn't mention is Apache crash battle damage. We have approximately 7 to 8 Apaches at CCAD, and we've turned 5 since September of 16. Why is that important? So we got to get Apaches out in the field because we're short, specifically at Rucker. Okay, so we're part of that solution. We got to do our part. I know I kind of hijacked there with CCAD, but any questions on CCAD or any other questions? I'm going to let, oh, yes, ma'am.
I had a pretty specific UH-60 Victor question. So I understand right now the UH-60V is restricted to a single core processor due to flight safety restrictions. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on, the flight safety requirements that arise with a multi-core processor, and then maybe if you can say like when the Army envisions being able to integrate a multi-core processor on
You
the
work
Victor.
for the PM?
Pardon?
You work for the PM?
Sorry, Flight Global. I'm a reporter.
Okay, all right. Well, here. And then I want to talk a little bit about in general on Vic.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So great question. And so we actually are working with the FAA on figuring out how to use multiple cores for flight critical information. So the trick there is when you're processing flight critical information, it has to be a deterministic environment, meaning we know exactly where a piece of data is going to be, exactly when we need it. No room for error. And so on a multi-core processor, there's a lot of sharing going on across the cores. So right now, we're not able to do that. So the direct answer to your question is no. Can the Victor model with the current multi-core processor, is it going to be able to use all the cores to process flight critical information? The answer right this second is no. Is it always going to be that way? No, because we're progressing on learning how to be able to use all of the cores to be able to process flight critical information. Rockwell Collins is very far along that process with the FAA on some of their commercial activities. And so we in the Army are closely working with that, because obviously that's a goal that we need to moving forward, because more and more processing capability, and obviously that is the way. So it's not limiting anything on the ability of the airplane to perform, but obviously we would like in the long term to have greater capacity on our chips.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize this is back on. I don't quite understand, though, the flight safety issue that comes into play there then.
So when you're processing the information, so when you move the stick,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that go on that tell the swash plate exactly how far to move, which tells your rotor blades exactly how far to move, and all that is very, very, very specific information, right? You're moving along at pace, and you're trying to do all of these high important maneuvers. Everything, you need to know exactly how everything's going to work. And so in the aviation industry, we consider that flight critical information, and there's certain parts that we call flight critical parts, and all of those things get a lot of extra attention to make sure that they're robustly designed, and we want to make sure that the software is robustly designed. And so I'm trying to keep it as so. You want to jump in?
No.
Anyway, so as you know, the Army, my organization, writes the airworthiness releases. Those are the authorizations to fly to our aviation products. We have to be able to understand exactly how all those ones and zeros, the digits, flow through the system. And I don't know. Does that help you with that?
I think so. Yeah. Just basically, I guess the parts.
Well, let's put it this way. So in your car, if your radio doesn't work, that's a nuisance.
Right.
If you tap your brakes and you can't stop, that's a big deal.
Right. Yeah.
Flight critical stuff, you want to be able to tap the brakes when you need to, you want to be able to steer where you want to steer, and you want it to be able to work 100% of the time. If your radio doesn't work, I got it. That's an issue with you. Does that help in the analogy department?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So he does, Mr. Langout's team, they do the analysis, and then the airworthiness authority is me. So we have to sign off. I have to sign off on that everything's been done, the risk mitigation's been done, and it's safe to do. And sometimes that takes time.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And the brake versus the radio is probably a good analogy.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Do you have any idea when you might see that, timeline-wise?
Like Mr. Langout said, we don't have it now. I can't give you an exact timeline, but I think there's an end state. I just can't give you an end I didn't state on the right side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a generic answer, but that's the best I got. So to the UH-60 Victor, if I could just say a couple words about that. We just had Chief of Staff of the Army visit us about a week ago. We showed him the UH-60 Victor simulator. What's important about this is that it is government designed, government integrated, and hopefully government produced. Now for industry, I know there's a lot of folks not alarmed. You shouldn't be. There's a lot of public-private partnerships going on all across that airframe. But we're going to take the Limas and we're going to make Victors at CCAD. We're going to install the cockpit, and the Victor is going to be just like a Mike cockpit. So if you're a Mike pilot, you get into a Victor, the button pushes are going to be the same. That's the and like Colonel Lancetta has said, we'll hope to produce those at CCAD. Hasn't been done before. So, any other questions, thoughts? Uh-oh. You guys were teed up, weren't you?
Jen Judson with Defense News. I have a couple questions. One actually related to CCAD. When I was actually down there was probably 3 or so years ago, and there was an issue keeping your personnel employed. A lot of them were going off into the oil industry. That was from like high-level engineers to... Sorry?
I said, did you get a name? Sorry.
So I'm wondering if that has leveled off, if you're able to retain employees a little bit better now that things are changing in the oil industry, or if you're still facing problems with that now.
That's a great question. So a simple answer is it has leveled off, but as the work reduced, I had to adjust the workforce to meet the demand. So the labor hours have to meet that. So you're exactly right. A lot of those engineers went off into the oil industry, but that was a combination of not just the oil industry being there, but also the workforce or the workload being reduced during that time frame. As we started pulling back,
the government shut down at the time.
Well, not only that, but as we pulled back from Iraq and Afghanistan, our forces, the need for those types of recapitalization. So there is a difference between reset and recap. So recap is a full zeroed out aircraft. Reset is just components or a case-by-case basis. Yes, sir. Right. We only do recap. So when that is no longer required, those aircraft being utilized quite a bit more in Iraq and Afghanistan, that workload lessens. So when I did that, those folks had to find other opportunities. So, but it has stabilized since then. So that was from 2012 to now. We were at 5,500 artisans or workforce at CCAD. Now we're about 3,600, but it's stabilized so far.
Okay. Thank you. The other question I have is for you, sir. No, General.
Oh.
Last year, we talked a little bit about the balance between green suit maintainers and contractors, right. And that's considering both home station and also in the deployed. I think those are a little bit two different issues. One is, how do you just strike a balance between contractors and maybe some overworked green suit maintainers on the homeland side when they're home station deployed, and then giving maintainers the experience that they need when they're deployed. They're not really getting that. It's being given to contractors due to deployment regulations, basically. So I'm wondering, you talked about how you need to strike a balance. Have you been able to figure out or get to some sort of understanding on what might be a solution and what is a proper balance between green suit maintainers and contractors?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and balance is a great word to talk about in life, right? It's how do you achieve balance? My personal opinion is we were too contractor reliant for a lot of good reasons. A lot of strategic reasons. The second and third order effect of that is, I think our kids, we lost troubleshooting, we lost basic maintenance management capabilities in our force. Obviously, we know we deployed units to specifically Afghanistan without their aviation support battalions, etc. That was a policy decision, and Roger got it. You list the forces down, and you got to go with what you need. So will that, in terms of, I'll address in terms of deployed, and then I'll come back to the homeland. I think our sensing is we've been able to get more soldiers into theater to do maintenance tasks, which is a good thing. We obviously still have contractors performing maintenance downrange. So I think the balance while we're deployed is going more towards green suit. So, break. Now the homeland, in terms of the holistic aviation assessment task force recommendations, which I think you're familiar with, one of the recommendations was to standardize contract and green suit. How do we do that within the combat aviation brigades? We do have a recommendation. We're staffing that right now. And what that will do is we think, will enable green suit cab commanders and the cab leadership to rely more on green suit as we take the contractors and move them more towards pass-back secondary maintenance. However, that's a FORSCOM, that's not my call, that's a FORSCOM decision. So that HADF, I gave you the acronym for that HADF recommendation, we're staffing that right now, AMC with FORSCOM. We don't know what the exact number is per cab because everybody wants to know, well, how many contractors in a cab? We have a number, we've staffed that. We think we know what it looks like, but that's kind of where we're at. So that's our effort to try to get at that.
In having more green suit maintainers at home station, though, is that still not addressing the problem that some green suit maintainers feel a little overworked in the sense that they have other duties that they need to do when they're here at stateside?
Well, I would say that's a unit leadership issue. Having done that before, and now in my position looking back at it, you never have the total amount of people that you want. I mean, if you could I need more people. You just have to lead them properly. So that's not maybe the answer you wanted to hear, but I think we're doing a better job at that, quite frankly. As you've asked this question now 2 years in a row, I think the leadership is addressing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thoughts? Uh-oh. You're not going to go really technical on me, are you?
No, sir. Megan Doherty-Myers from Avicent. Sir, in regards to the Victor simulator that you mentioned previously being government-developed, owned, operated, is that emblematic of any future trends in simulation, or is that sort of a one-off?
I don't know if it's a one-off. It's what we did on this to look out into the future. Quite frankly, we think it's a way to reduce cost, reduce time, and have, I don't want to say the majority, but government general purpose rights to the tech data is important, and we feel that was a move in that direction. So I wouldn't say it's a one-off, but it is different. It is different than what we've been used to doing. So, yeah, make sure you spell his name right. Any other questions, please? But you guys are. What about the back?
I have another sort of weedy question, but what are you doing to assess and mitigate corrosion-related losses of aviation parts and storage?
Yeah, her question was, what are you doing about corrosion-related losses and parts? So we don't have enough time today to talk about corrosion because corrosion is really a billion-dollar problem. And there's been a couple studies that have told us, and if you've been around the field a day or two, you understand it. So I think one of the most important things we can do as an enterprise is educate. Of course, we need money too, but educate. And I'll just start out with the basics. So our SSAs, or where we store majority of our parts. If you look around the country, how do units store their parts? One, it would be nice to have overhead cover. Let's start there. Overhead cover is a step forward, right? If we got that, maybe let's move them into a building. If we don't have, and then the next step is a climatized building. So it's incremental, and that's just the basics. However, let's talk about how we move our aircraft into theater on ships. And we've made large strides with that in ensuring, and I don't know if there's any 25th cab folks out there, but Pacific Pathways and some numerous exercises that just happened, we ensured that we moved our helicopters below ship. There's nothing worse than having a CH-47 or an MLRS or pick your weapon system on the top deck of a ship 10 hours overseas. That's bad. Then you got corrosion issues. So I think we've done a better job as an AMC, Army Material Command Enterprise, moving our high dollar pacing items on the right vessels, which quite frankly we weren't maybe doing such a good job in the past. So those are 2 points. And then there's corrosion mitigation issues that we have a very small team. It actually belongs to Amerdeck, but between us, we try to visit units. We just got back from a unit in Texas, and to talk about measures, how can we improve, how can we get better, did you know, etc. But corrosion is a real issue.
Thank you.
Okay. Is it your turn now? No? I'm just... Anybody in the back? I see smiles back there. You're just taking a rest. Okay, I'll tell you what, I don't want to put him on the spot, but Colonel Andy Gillette is the MILDEP for our Aviation Logistics Center, and I'm surprised I didn't get any supply chain management or accountability questions. But before I give him a couple minutes here to think, any questions on supply chain? Because I know a lot of the vendors here at Quad A have an interest in supply chain. Accountability, management, procedures, supply availability. I've been tasked by my boss to achieve 100%. That's hard because generally supply availability, we hover around 80% as an enterprise. So that entails getting after back orders, talking to item managers, making sure we're properly engaged. So, Andy.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I just want to say a quick thing about corrosion, because I think corrosion is a big part of supply availability, because we have a lot of parts out there, whether it's in a tech supply or supply support activity or anywhere else in our depots. We have corrosion challenges. So it really comes down to, I think, 3 main areas. First one being facilities. You have to address the appropriate facilities. I think that would include the containers that we store them in and the method of storing, whether it's the desiccant and checking humidity indicators and our process procedures. But the things that contain them, I think training is critical. We do a lot within AMCOM and Amerdeck and the Corrosion Program Office, and to get out there, and even the PM offices, to get out there and train soldiers or bring soldiers to Redstone Arsenal, provide training so they understand what corrosion looks like, the levels of corrosion, and how to mitigate it. And I think lastly would be the materials, whether it's using corrosion prevention sprays or additives, or changing the type of paints that we use, and doing a lot of material testing to figure out what mitigates corrosion best. And a lot of that is done with an Amerdeck. So I think if you look into those 3 areas, you address a lot of your corrosion stuff. So within AMCOM Logistics Center, we have 2 primary efforts. I think the main thing I would say that we do is we would provide B-17 and B-64 aviation and missile parts to the warfighter to enable readiness at the point and time of need. I'd say the second thing that we do is to provide maintenance support to the field, and primarily at this point it's primarily aviation maintenance. So the contractor versus green suitor type thing question is something that we always try to help strike the balance with. On that question of maintenance, I would say the soldiers must always be the primary maintainer. I think that's the golden rule, and we must always foster and support that, because we don't have expeditionary combat power projection capability if we rely on something outside of soldiers being the primary maintainer. But we have to design our aircraft under that construct of design for maintainability. We have to design our supply systems for design for sustainability and expeditionary, so we understand the footprint, reach, and duration of our weapon systems. For striking the balance, I think looking at how we strike the balance, knowing that we're the ones that put the contractors on the battlefield, I would say it has to be through a pass-back augmentation capability. So we establish a baseline capability that augments the soldier workforce, but the soldiers must take and accept the mission first. And what is beyond their capacity or beyond their capability, we will then accept and we will then perform with contractors. And I think that's what protects the health of our soldier workforce, and that's what protects their proficiency and combat readiness to deploy. So contractors are an augmentation of soldiers, but not ever intended to be a replacement of soldiers. And we do have some areas where there are some FML constraints that drive us to replacement of soldiers, and we try to deal with that as best as possible, but try to encourage the ability to get soldiers into the fight per se to maintain those helicopters. Within AMCOM Logistics Center, we really try to go at optimizing the supply chain, to enabling the supply chain to be responsive to the workforce requirement. I think we do that relatively well. We're not at 100% supply availability yet, but that's our goal. We're going to set our mark high. We have to do that through a lot of different things. I think forecasting is the challenge. We live in a dynamic environment where safety of flights, aviation safety messages and maintenance messages, they drive the projection and the stock of our on-hand assets, because it changes our monthly demand based upon anything that we find that comes out in the field. So when our monthly demand changes, we also now have to deal with the acquisition lead time. So we're trying to address the acquisition lead time. So if you have a 300-day, 500-day, 700-day acquisition lead time, you have to be able to forecast well in advance to predict those things that are relatively unpredictable. So we try to live in that world, but we both address the forecasting piece. We address the acquisition lead time piece by unified action, by working with ACC Redstone and DLA contracting, and we try to bring that acquisition lead time. But we also have to ask our industry partners when we put out an RFP that we get a responsive reply back to competitive bids and RFPs, so that way we can try to accelerate as much as possible the timeline for contracting and awarding that contract and delivering the parts. One of the other ways we would ask is that we know that our industry partners out there, we know that they have a good sense of what the demand is and what the weapon system sustainment requirements are, because we are familiar with our weapon system. So we ask our industry partners sometimes to go a bit at risk and know that we have that demand, and sometimes there's gaps when we have to put in a bridge contract or we have to try to establish a repair contract or provisioning contract, that our industry partners understand that we still have a requirement to fly, to fight, and to operate those aircraft, and that to still keep their subs or keep them as OEM primes, those production lines warm, so that they are able to be responsive to us as we try to be responsive to the warfighter. And I could probably go well over my time here, sir, but unless there's any questions there, I'll cease.
So one thing you can do is there's primes and there's subs sitting out in the audience, and as we moved into a different battle rhythm, we have monthly supply chain meetings that are pretty exciting, and we talk about you. We talk about DLA, we talk about all the folks that are out there. We talk about ALT and PALT, and I have contracting with me in the room, and we have DLA. We have everybody sitting right at the table, and we talk about all these issues that Andy, by part number, and where it's at, and who's got it, and why this, and where we're going. So I'm going to come to a lot of you, and I'm going to challenge you, and I'm going to say, okay, this part, where's it at? What are we doing? and I know it's a two-way street. So I would just tell you that I find it interesting sometimes that a sub to a sub to a sub, and I can't figure out who's the father, who owns the family. So if your name's on that aircraft, or I'm coming to you, so we're going to have a conversation about it. So we're getting after it. I know it's a two-way street. We certainly have issues on our side, but together it's all about putting it on the battlefield for the warfighter, and that's what we're about. So with that, I think we've hit our time lot, and unless anybody want to fire any alibi rounds or questions. Okay, well, thanks a lot, and we'll be up here for a while if you want to come up and ask a particular question one-on-one. Thank you.